Welcome to episode 235 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm so excited to introduce you to Dr. Tessa Misiaszek, co-author of Branding That Means Business. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. In today's conversation, I am joined by Dr. Tessa Misiaszek, co-author of Branding That Means Business. Tessa is an instructor with Harvard Professional Development Programs, as well as a professor at Hult International Business School. She brings extensive experience developing human capital strategies to improve business communications. Previously, she served as CEO of Empathetics, Inc., a company that developed empathic communications training for healthcare professionals, and she's currently the head of research for Korn Ferry. She's also one of the hosts of the Happy at Work podcast, which I was honored to be a guest on recently, discussing my book, What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You. Today, Tessa is here discussing her new book, Branding That Means Business, which she co-authored with Matt Johnson, who was on the show 2 weeks ago talking about the customer side of branding. Today, Tessa and I look a little more on the employee side of things and how much that matters for brands and businesses. Now, I've already mentioned a bunch of books in past episodes, and I want to be sure you know that there are links for all the important stuff you're going to hear in today's episode within the show notes, which are waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/235. Now let's jump right in. Dr. Tessa Misiaszek, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, absolutely. I am so delighted. And we're going to be chatting just a few weeks after your co-author's second episode on the podcast, Matt Johnson, comes out. I would love if you can tell everyone a little bit about your background. There's maybe a little bit in the book that people will already know. We're going to talk about a different angle about, like we've already said in kind of our pre-call. But if you can share a little bit about you and the work that you do to kick us off, that'd be great.
Sure. So I actually currently am the head of research for the Korn Ferry Institute. Korn Ferry is a very large executive search and talent management consulting business that is worldwide and has, I think we have about 13,000 employees now globally. So quite a big organization, but I haven't always been in the corporate world. I actually recently transitioned back to corporate. Prior to that, I was actually a marketing professor serving at Hult International Business School for the past few years. And then prior to that, have actually had quite the entrepreneurial experience, having run 3 different startups, always doing work in this space around communications, organizational culture, building human capital strategies for organizations. And then as I moved into academia, actually started to have more of a focus looking at marketing, and then was able to really prioritize my research around looking at the intersection between organizational culture and the marketing function, and how do you leverage employee engagement and culture in order to build an authentic brand. So that's what brings us here today.
Yeah. And so did you know Matt before you started teaching at Hult, or?
I did not. I actually met Matt. Gosh, I think the first time I met him, although I think he would have the same story, was we were in England at Ashridge, the castle outside of London that's part of Hult International Business School. And we started talking about empathy. And I had been the CEO for an empathy training company called Empathetics that was founded by a neuroscientist out of Mass General. And we actually got into quite a debate about empathy. And that's where we first met, but then decided to start working together. So we have really complementary skill sets and research interests. So thought it would be fun to venture on a book together.
Okay. Well, you have to at least give some insight into this debate, right? So share a little bit about the empathy conversation, because I would guess that a lot of people listening, you kind of have empathy is empathy, right? Like we empathize or we don't. That must be just something. And you kind of look at, is it good or bad to empathize maybe? But so of course, I'm sure you're looking at this at a much deeper level. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it was interesting. The context of the work I had done with empathy, again, working with a neuroscientist, her name was Helen Reese out of Mass General Hospital. She had looked at the impact of empathic communication between providers, doctors and nurses and their patients. And how did that impact clinical health outcomes? And of course, out of that comes all sorts of really cool research as it relates to other aspects, such as does empathy help with burnout, and does empathy help with, building trust between the provider and the patient, so that you actually perhaps could lower your medical rates of medical malpractice and so forth. So it was a very positive look at empathy and the impact and its benefits. And the debate with Matt was, does empathy have a scaling issue? And can empathy deplete you as a person? Because if you give too much, you get burnt out. And so we used to have these debates around, well, you have to have some self-empathy first, develop those, the four quadrants of emotional intelligence, and really pay attention to have self-awareness before you can actually give empathy. So those were the very exciting conversations we had with empathy while, drinking wine in England. So that's what kicked off our friendship.
It sounds like a dream to me. Well, and I was actually going to make the point where what I thought you were getting to is kind of the angle that Matt was coming from, where it's empathizing too much could be depleting to where you then totally forget about your own self, and you've given too much, and then that can lead to burnout. But like you're saying, then if you completely stop empathizing and become more robotic to not feel what's going on with your patients, like working in an oncology unit or whatever, that you get too much and you feel like you can't do anything, then that's not helpful, for anybody either. So yeah, interesting balance. So
absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I always love to ask everyone who has written a book, because I know there are lots of people that listen to the show that either have written books or aspire to write them, and even just for any sort of content, which everyone is a content manager these days. You can't be in business and not be creating lots of content. So what sort of tips do you have in writing a book? What was that process like for you, especially with a co-author? I am just working on a single article with a co-author, and I was realizing I've never really co-authored anything, and it's so strange for me. So I'm very intrigued about that process.
Yes. Well, I always say I used to tell my students this, that if you go into business or create a startup with a partner, that you have to realize it's like a marriage. And if it goes bad, it can go really bad, like a bad divorce. So you want to make sure that you have that right partner from the outset, that you're really, creating with and creating value. I think for both Matt and I, we had the same intention, that we really wanted to say something different about brand strategy in the world of branding, and really come at it with a new lens that would add value to marketers who are examining this, or even for consumers or anyone interested in learning more about brand strategy, especially in today's environment. So I think having that kind of common purpose and that value system around having that intention to add value helps you get through some of the challenges. But I think the other thing is we had really distinct ways that we were approaching the book. So, he had a social psychology lens. I was coming at it with more of a marketing function type lens. And together, I think we created a pretty unique approach to building brand strategy. So that helped us as well. But we also did this over the course of the pandemic. And so honestly, I know you write lots of books. I don't know how you do it with young children and working. But I had lots of time at home and lots of weekends of writing. And the pandemic kind of gave us that opportunity, which I guess was a gift from that perspective. to get the writing done. But it definitely took a lot more iterations than I thought, as far as, we probably rewrote the same chapter 3 or 4 times to kind of get it right and to feel really good about what's our messaging moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I was telling Matt, so he co-authored Blind Sight with Prince, who's also been on the show. And I'm going to be, linking to lots of episodes in the show notes for everyone listening here. But then co-authoring with you, it was interesting to have read them both and to see that there's a common feel to the language, and yet it's a little bit different, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint anything within it, but it's got really useful stories that helps carry you along, but they don't drag on, which is really nice. And I don't know how you managed to make it sound like one person, but you did a really great job in that process, to where I almost don't even know which questions to ask, because I was saying, I don't know what's from Matt's side, what's from your side. I don't know. But we're going to talk today more about the internal function of marketing, branding, and culture, which is something that I care a lot about. So for people who are not in the marketing function, or who are maybe in a marketing function, but in an organization that doesn't think culture belongs to marketing or within marketing at all, and maybe doesn't value that marketing voice, what are your thoughts on that, and how important marketing is to an organization?
Sure. It's, well, first of all, if you think about the definition of marketing, what is the function of marketing? It is value creation. And you really think about what are the levers you can pull to create value for the customer. And so at the most basic form, when you think about how do you create value, you think about what are those levers. It's your product, your service that you're developing. And then, of course, how do you price it? How are you promoting it? And how are you distributing it? That's kind of the core function of what marketing is. And how do you create value and have that value realized for the consumer? What's interesting about, as an entrepreneur myself, and as someone who taught entrepreneurship for the past 10, 12 years at the collegiate level, it's interesting because I think a lot of people are quick to jump to sales, and they kind of think about marketing later, or marketing comes, when they're thinking about when they have more venture capital and they can spend more money and so forth. So there's not that real strategic perspective on what is marketing, and then how will that help me sell, and how do I differentiate the two? And then, of course, enter social media, and everyone is quick to say, okay, well, I got to get on social media. But again, that's marketing, but you have to take a similar lens to your presence on social media, and really thinking, okay, not just how do I kind of get messages out there and post to the masses, but how am I creating value through that media channel? How am I positioning my product? How am I adding value to what it is that I can communicate with my consumers and so forth? So when we think about brand in particular, and should brand be a strong consideration at the outset of a company? And well, what if I have a 100-year-old brand and it's, it seems pretty set in stone? Do I really have to think about brand anymore? There's a few pieces that I think matter here. First of all, understanding that brand is not marketing, that brand is an asset to your marketing strategy, right? So you have the strategy for how you're going to create value for the customer, and brand is a piece of that, a very important piece of that, but it's a piece of being able to say something, position the product, and to add value through your brand messaging, your brand identifiers, the way that you talk about your brand. And, for companies that have really well-established brands, we're in a new day. And as someone with an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old, this next generation of consumers they're very different as it pertains to not just the fact that they're our first post-digital generation, or digital natives, where they've never known a world without social media or iPhones or smartphones, but that they really think about their purchases from the perspective of values and purpose, and that the brand is what they're looking to, because it's really an extension of their own personal brand, that they're making those consumer decisions based on what they want to tell the world about themselves. And that there has to be alignment with the consumer based on those values and that purpose. And so even for well-established brands, that you might be appealing to a younger generation of consumers, it's important to think about, okay, what is our strategy moving forward and how can we be more authentic in the way that we represent how we do business, what our value systems are, how we treat our employees, and so forth. So, I hope that answered your question, but it's the marketing function is important to that, but brand is certainly a strong asset to make your marketing strategy successful.
Yeah. And so my undergrad's in marketing, and I worked in brand strategy and whatnot before getting my master's in behavioral economics and going down that route. So the marketing piece is still very central to me. And it is just, who you are. You don't just get to say something these days, like you're saying with social media. It's not unheard of for a brand to get canceled if they were to be treating employees in a way that's out of integrity with what they're saying they're about or what they care about in the world and what they represent. That authenticity needs to really tie through everything. And yes, the outward messaging of what you're saying to customers matters, but you need to be living who you are really authentically throughout the entire brand, including the hiring process and how you talk about things on LinkedIn, and everything really just needs to be consistent. And if you don't have that central touchstone from what the brand is, who we're about, then it's just going to be a mess.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of examples in just the last 2 to 3 years of companies who, they're trying to connect, they're trying to leverage social media to say something about themselves. They're trying to jump on the bandwagon of sustainability or the environment and climate change. They're wanting to say something about gender pay equity. They're wanting to say something about Black Lives Matter. But, what we're seeing from these digital natives, this younger generation of consumers who are incredibly digital savvy, is that they know how to skirt around the curtain of information asymmetry, and they can quickly look in and call out companies who are not living their values, their brand promise. And in doing that, a lot of brands and companies have been called out for saying, wait a minute, you can't hashtag BLM if you don't have any racial or ethnic minorities on your board. You can't talk about gender pay equity if you don't have any women in your executive suite, or these are the actual statistics. Not to mention that there's a number of new apps and sites that are connecting communities of employees together, that, people are going online anonymously or not and saying, hey, listen, this is what's happening at my company. And they're really having a voice and sharing their own experiences. And so for companies, the antidote to, that kind of challenge you have as to, am I going to go viral for an event, or are one of my employees going to call me out, or will I be found out if I haven't done this, is just to be transparent and just to say, we're doing the work. This is our goal. And, this is our journey and our process to get there. And what both Matt and I found in our research for the book is that at the end of the day, it's the transparency that builds trust. And once consumers have trust that you're doing what you say you do, even if you're on a journey to get there, they're more likely to be loyal and forgiving if you happen to, as a company, not being pure in what it is that you're espousing. So.
Yeah. Once you get, essentially what I hear in that is, so in my first book, I talk about how brands and why they matter in the beginning. And in saying, if you go on a blind date with someone, you are filtering out, like looking for like this person's a hero or a zero. And even the smallest thing, that example I use is like they slurp their soup in a weird way. And someone who would have been a 10 is totally out because of that weird slurp. You go, oh man, I can't live with that for the rest of my life. Whereas if my husband was to slurp his soup in a weird way tonight, I'm not going to be like, well, we're done. I'm out, right? So when we have a brand that we really love, that's one of our favorites that we identify with, like you were saying, that's part of who we are, we're more willing to forgive. They're part of Team Us, as far as we adopt. And I've been talking about these sorts of things quite a bit on the show recently with my new book, which will have just come out when this airs. Oh, how exciting. So we'll have that, a lot of these things linked in the show notes. Some of the quotes, I wrote down some things while I was reading and have to hold back because I wanted to make lots and lots of notes and things to ask about. But you have a piece in here saying, so consumers are humans who buy stuff they want and need. Brands matter when and only when they matter to humans. And another related quote there saying, why bother creating a brand at all, much less a meaningful one? Products can be copied. A strong brand provides stability in the face of transience. So, like we said, the outward side of a brand is pretty intuitive in a lot of ways. And like I said, we talked with Matt about that. But how does a company go about having that authenticity, choosing what their brand is going to be based on? Is there a point where you say you should always start here? So we'll say there's an established company that is looking to update and make its brand stand for something. We won't say they're like in the 100-year realm, but something that's been around for a little bit. Where do you suggest they start in creating a more authentic brand?
Sure. So I think it is a collaboration that happens between the founders of the company or those leading the company and the customers. I think that moving forward, the more that you can collaborate with the customers and really understanding what their value systems are, what their needs are, to quote Clayton Christensen, what job does the product or the service do for them, and how is it adding value to their lives? The greater understanding that executives or leaders or chief marketing officers can have of that consumer experience. And getting back to that empathy word, the more empathy you can have for the way that your consumers live their lives and think about how your product or service is integrated into the way they live their lives, then that will allow you to build a more authentic brand, more connected to them, and really help lead you in determining what is that purpose and what are those values. Now, it's this kind of chicken and this egg conversation. What comes first, the brand purpose and values or the consumer's purpose and values? And if you haven't done this exercise from the outset, then I think it has to be a collaborative process, right? So if you have a year-old startup and you're thinking, we don't even have company values or brand values, we haven't started, well, then it gets started, and it should be a collaborative process with your consumers. If you have a startup that you don't have customers yet, you have a new product, what's important to understand in this product age that we're in the world of Amazon, where everything can be replicated, is that really at the core, especially with technology and the ability for things to be replicated and copied so quickly, that it's really brand that's the great differentiator, right? So if you look at, and that's what people want. People want to wear a brand that says something about themselves, or to use a product or a service that makes them feel good about themselves because of the way that product or service was made, or because of the way that company, what its values are, or what they do for society, or what their greater impact is. And so it's really the brand that can differentiate more than any product characteristic or attribute. Yes, we want to make widgets bigger, better, faster. And, 15, 20 years ago, that was when we had smaller communities and smaller sales regions, and our competitors were fewer. Then you could think about that differentiation based on a product's characteristics. But today, in a global market with the internet, with huge platforms like Amazon who can really replicate your product tomorrow, right? Then it's about, okay, well, what can make my product or service stand out? How can I differentiate from the competition? How can I create something that is not easily replicable? And that is through building a strong brand.
Yeah. Do you have some examples that come to mind where maybe it could be a super commoditized type of industry, but where people really value the brand and don't care even when, someone tried to copy them or anything else where that brand has really carried through the value for that organization?
Yeah, I mean, there's our book is chock full of examples. Yeah. And so I'm quickly going through the index in my mind of all the different examples. But, there are certainly brands that have been so steadfast and true in their purpose and their values. Patagonia is one of them, right? That it's always been about environment, consciousness, and even though their products are really expensive and, not that accessible. And so as a result, it's not a very inclusive brand, but it hasn't ever made excuses for that. And they have always been so focused on environment and doing the right thing for society that, again, I think that's one of those brands that has been very authentic in its approach to the market. Of course, it was interesting. Our publisher said, don't you dare use Apple in the book as an example. But if you think about, only because it's used over and over again, but hey, it's a fantastic brand. And not only is it authentic, but and so highly correlated to its founder, to Steve Jobs, and the way that he kind of thought about the world, and also that kind of artistic value creation that came through in his products. But it's also about creating community and being able to really think very differently, not just about the products that they were making, but the experience that people had as associated with the brand. So walking into an Apple store, they were one of the first who eliminated the barriers of, being able to access someone in customer service, and that you could go to a Genius bar to get help with the product and the computer. And that was, incredibly intuitive to the point where you can just plug it in and it immediately starts working, that you don't have to have a degree in computer science to get it going. And so really just empathizing with the customers, Steve Jobs did this amazing job about building a product and a service and a brand that, everyone, if you think about the word Apple, you probably don't think of the fruit anymore. You immediately think about the computer. And what does that mean to the customer as far as the intuitiveness, the design, the creativity piece, the access to information, and so forth. And so that's when we talk about that quote that you read from the book around brands having meaning, but they only have meaning if they're meaningful to the customer. It's really about, again, through that collaborative process, understanding how that brand's going to resonate with the customer. And then how do you continuously reinforce that level of experience with the customer?
For sure. And so since I'm sure it's a piece of science perhaps that maybe isn't in the book, I can't remember specifically if it's mentioned in it because it's one I've seen a lot, right? But is when people were shown the Apple logo versus the IBM logo for just, a fraction of a second, didn't realize it. And then were asked to do a task. Those who saw the Apple logo were more innovative and creative in the process and the project they were working on than those that saw that IBM logo. And that's where you think, that is a brand, Apple, like you said, that up and down, side to side, people think innovation and creativity and intuitiveness, and enough that the flash of a logo, it means something to you. And you don't necessarily have that from a lot of other brands. So you have to really live and breathe who you are for that to be so quick that your little tiny image means something. So for a company that's trying to build out culture for their brand, do you have any recommendations of picking, what your culture is going to stand for? I would assume people, as with so many other things, we have trouble limiting to a certain number. So they want to be everything to everybody. So if you have tips maybe about narrowing down a focus and how to maybe pick what matters, do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, as a brand, you can't be all things to all people. So don't try to be. Understand. And again, this is part of the differentiation process. I mean, at the end of the day, these businesses, whether they're nonprofit or for profit, still are trying to generate revenue. And understanding the competitive landscape and understanding, ways in which you can differentiate, including on brand, is important to think about at the very outset. And then we talk a lot about purpose and values. So from a purpose perspective, we actually give this stepwise process around finding purpose and really getting to that why we exist. What is our impact on the world? What's that kind of higher piece that allows us to operate as a company? And from an employee perspective, if you think, companies are only as good as the people who run them, and being able to really connect that purpose to the employee organization, the culture that you develop within the company is very important to have well-defined, so that it's not just words or a mission statement on a website, but that it's actually operationalized and felt throughout the company. And then when you look at value systems and what values are going to help you with your business decision making so that you can reach that purpose and really develop a business strategy that is not only profitable, but actually helps you make that societal impact or help you reach that purpose in that industry or perhaps just in your lives or in your work, that those values, again, have to be authentic to the organization, to the culture, and to the brand. I think we quote in the book, it's like upwards of 82% of companies have trust, integrity, teamwork as their company values, those are fantastic values to have. But if we all have the same values as companies, we are not going to be differentiating from each other, right, in the way that we do business. And if we're all doing business the same way, then what really differentiates our brand? And so being able to go through this exercise of saying, based on our purpose and what really distinguishes us in the market, then what are the values that are going to help us get there? How do we actually think about the types of business decisions and how we want to make those decisions through our value systems in order to help us get there? And what's unique about our organization and our culture that we want to develop so that we can have those be guiding principles to help us, garner or create that type of culture. And so developing those values is an important part of that exercise. And then from there, it's building infrastructure, right? Everyone thinks, okay, I got the mission and the values on the website. We're all set now. Nope. That's just the beginning. Now you've got to think about what's the infrastructure and the operation, and your entire talent management strategy from that point forward should be guided by those values, the type of people that you're hiring into the organization, the type of environment in which they're working, and then, of course, how do you retain them, and also how do you guide them in the rest of their career? All of that is connected to purpose and values.
Yeah, definitely. When you were talking, I was thinking of a brand that I'm sure has come up either in your teaching or as you were working on the book, which is Zappos, as far as a brand that I think, and we don't want to say it's the first, but the first that really publicly lived their values in a way that no one else did, where everyone would know all 10 at any given point, and you were bringing them up. I don't know if have you done the tour at Zappos? Have you been able to go do that?
I haven't done the tour. Is it in Las Vegas?
Yes, it is.
Yes, I'm actually headed to Vegas in September, so maybe I'll put that on my list.
Yeah, I've done it before as part of a marketing conference that I was attending actually years ago. It's really cool and interesting to be able to go and tour. And with your background, I'm sure you would love that. If they're doing tours right now, worth it.
Yeah.
But when you think about Zappos and values, we'll say here is like, do you have thoughts on Zappos more and what other companies can learn from that?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I entered into entrepreneurship in 2004, and I would say it was, it must have been 2009, 2010. I was kind of in the thick of it. We were trying to shop out the company. I was partnered with 3 physicians, and that's when I actually learned about Zappos for the first time, and Tony Hsieh and the way he thought about his company. Really, again, it was that intersection between really thinking strongly about culture and how to build a culture that really engages the employees, and then to be able to deliver on that and have that really drive everything about the company. It's business decision making, it's marketing function, it's customer service elements. And I think, if I remember, the purpose of Zappos was to deliver happiness, right? So that's the overarching purpose, which is to deliver happiness. And then all their different cultures, I think it was like be wacky or whatever, the different values that they had were all around how do you make decisions based on those values to deliver happiness to people? And shoes was just the catalyst to do that, right? So when people, yes, I love shoes and I'd love to work for a shoe company someday, but I also love to deliver happiness. And that's something that really, I think, people connect to when they're developing culture and when you're thinking about organizational culture. It's certainly, I think, something that gives more meaning to people's lives if you can actually, as a company, say that's what your purpose is.
For sure. Well, and so, Tony's book is Delivering Happiness, which is a great book. I'll link to it in the show notes for everybody if you haven't read it yet. But I felt compelled now to look it up as some inspiration for core values. It was very easy to find. And as something here, they have an oath of employment as well, which you can read and download as far as that transparency piece again. So their 10 core values are: deliver wow through service, embrace and drive change, create fun and a little weirdness, like you were saying, that kind of wacky side, be adventurous, creative, and open-minded, pursue growth and learning, build open and honest relationships with communication, build a positive team and family spirit, do more with less, be passionate and determined, and 10 is to be humble. So, all good stuff. And I think showing a way that, I don't know that for most companies, we would recommend starting with 10. 10's a lot of things to try to, if you're just jumping in.
Yeah, I tell startups to start with 5. 5 is, you can always build as you grow, but I think it's to come up with 5 very unique, authentic values that resonate within the industry that you're in, that will resonate with your employees, that connect to your consumers. It's a good number to start with.
Yeah. Oh, and that authentic piece reminds me, the other thing I was thinking while you were talking is, so like you said, the 82% or whatever that have trust and whatnot. I know a lot have a lot of background working with financial services. So banking and credit unions, and everybody says that one of their values, and I don't have a stat, I feel like it's higher than 80%, that have part of their values being that they have the best service, that they differentiate on their service. But if everyone says that, it kind of gets to I love the Carrie Fisher quote from When Harry Met Sally, like, everyone thinks they have a great sense of humor, but not everybody can have a great personality and sense of humor, right? So it's the same. If we all say we have the best service, then nobody has the best service unless you're really, really living that. And so whether it's trust or service, it's not enough to just say it. You have to show it to where people can just say you're about this, in the same way that they do with Apple is about innovation or intuitiveness or beautiful design, things that everybody says. And you don't have to just keep saying it or say, oh, no, it's on our website. And if your employees don't know what your values are just off the bat, where, like I was saying, 10 is a lot, but every employee of Zappos, at least back in the day, would know all 10 immediately, no questions asked. And you could say, what's number 8? And they would have it, right? They know what those are because they really live them. So whatever it is you're going to pick, make sure it's something that your employees can live and embrace. And I would love for you to expand on that if you have thoughts.
No, absolutely. And I think your example about financial services and the service component is so important because, again, if it's an authentic value to the organization, it drives your business decision-making, then one of your pillars of innovation should probably be service. And that's getting redefined over and over as we move to this digital transformation. Whereas great customer service was walking into a bank and being greeted with a smile. Today, great customer service and financial services is making sure you have an app that is seamless, that if for my college student, that's safe, but that mom and dad can transfer money into, that he has, immediate access to emergency funds, that it's well protected, that there's great security. It's completely redefined, but those companies who do have service at the core of one of those values are continuously innovating based on that because that's what they want to be known for. And you have to think that it's going to change. The meaning of service is going to change over time in every industry, especially as we move into a much more digitalized space. I had the experience just 2 weeks ago. I was in New York City and I went to a hotel, to the Hyatt Hotel in Grand Central. And this is the hospitality industry, which is all about people. And when I was in college, I had friends who were HRTA majors in hospitality, and it was all about customer service. I walked into that hotel. It checked me in on an app. I went to a kiosk. I got my key. I went up to my room. I checked out on it. I never talked to a human being. And it was a fantastic experience, right? It was seamless. I had access to everything. I had no lines. I had anything I needed access or help with, I could do through the app, and I had instant someone at my door. It's been redefined. So again, it's not just words on a board. And if you created these values 10, 15 years ago, you have to think about how these values will evolve over time. And then, to stay true to that as part of your core identity as a company, you have to continuously innovate based on those values. So I think that one's a good example.
Oh, yeah. And I love what you were saying there. As the other thing is, in general, and I say to people all the time, and I'm by no means the first person to say this, but you are not your ideal customer. You're not selling to you, and the thing that you want is not what the people on the other side want or need. You're so far into what it is, what it was, what you've been about. And especially if you have, people that were innovative, 30 years ago when they created an organization, and now they've kind of forgotten what's cool for the new kids these days, that idea of service and people wanting to interact with people, you can't will them to do it. And the idea of, like you were saying in that hotel experience, as a company, you would say, well, we want to make sure we've got the best people. And there is something like a Ritz-Carlton, which is, there's no question. Everyone knows Ritz-Carlton is about that service and having empowered employees, and it means something in a different way. But for most of us, staying at, a random, I think you said a Hyatt in there or whatever else, and it's nothing by any means against that brand, but just random business travel, having to pop in, or like you said, potentially dropping kids off at college or whatever it is we're going in. We want a nice experience, but my best service is to not have to talk to anyone because I just got off a plane or I just had a really long drive. I want to just be able to go to my room and sleep because, that's a better service than, even if the person on the other side is incredibly kind, how much better would it have been? That's like taking that step back and to say, what does service mean today? If we still want to deliver that and that is our value, what does that mean moving forward? And to understand, I love the thesaurus. It's one of my very favorite things. So finding, a word and its related words and see what that means for you as an organization. Do you have tips as we close this out here of how often people should look at their values and revisiting them? We obviously don't want to do it too often, but we don't want to, not look at it ever again either. Do you have a kind of guideline for that?
Yeah, I think there should be an inventory at least once a year to say, are these still relevant? And are we doing our best by these values? Or is there one particular value that we're tripping up on enough? And, are there new values that we need to think about, right? Digital enablement might be a value that you didn't have 20 years ago, but you might need to have now. And that should be a focus of innovation, or that should be a focus of the way people think about their work. So it's, values don't need to be always warm and fuzzy, and they don't, always need to be, profit oriented either. But I think it's about, how do you want to think about your business decision making? And again, how does that connect to your purpose? And with the world changing and having a different kind of, place in the world as we move forward as businesses, then these things evolve over time. So I think of, doing a quick inventory of what are our values, how are we mapping against our values, are we doing a good job, are we innovating against them, I think is a healthy thing for a business to think about in order to maintain an authentic brand.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the insights. And of course, we'll be linking to Branding That Means Business in the show notes so everyone can go pick up their copy. If they were still on the fence or got busy and forgot after hearing Matt talk about it, definitely are ready to jump in there now and get their copy. Where else should people that are excited to interact with you and learn more, what's the best place for them to do that?
Sure. Well, I mean, the best place to do that is to link in with me. I'm always happy to link in. And as I mentioned, I also have a podcast, Happy at Work podcast, that they can listen to more around organizational culture and employee engagement and how to create a positive workplace environment.
Perfect. Well, we will definitely be linking to your podcast, we'll just mention LinkedIn. Oh, no, we'll link it. We link LinkedIn. We don't do email addresses because I care about your spam filter. So, but we'll have that in the show notes for everyone. So again, Tessa, thanks so much for joining me on the show. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you, Melina. It was great to be here.
Thank you again to Dr. Tessa Misiaszek for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? For me, I really enjoyed this idea about values and how they're different from, but also so closely related to the value created by a company. That is, of course, why Tuesday's episode was called What is Value? To help lead into this conversation today. If you haven't already listened to that one, it's episode 234 and a real fun one with lots of stories for the crazy amounts people will pay for things from celebrity kidney stones to art to grilled cheese sandwiches, along with information about how value is relative and what brands need to know about value, price, worth, and cost, since they're not the same thing. When you look at your company's values, what value are they creating for your employees and for your customers? Your brand promise may not be the same as your core values. And even if you don't have something written out anywhere yet, or aren't really living those day in and day out yet, consider this an opportunity to look at those and see how you can be doing better, no matter how well you're doing today. We talked today about Zappos and Delivering Happiness, a book which is definitely linked for you in the show notes, and how they truly live their values throughout the organization. Every employee knows them. They're plastered all throughout the office, and you can easily find them as a customer. Those values, truly living them, really says something about the brand that increases their value in the world. How can your brand do something like that? And don't let bike shedding and time discounting get in your way here. You don't need to wait to do something until you can be as good as Zappos. Look for the one little thing you can do today to get you a little better than you were yesterday. Those tiny incremental increases really add up and can help your brand to do amazing things one little bit at a time. Before we close out the show, don't forget there are links to past episodes, like the ones on bike shedding and time discounting and what is value. They're all within the show notes for this episode, along with related books like Tessa's Branding That Means Business and ways to get in contact with her. It's all waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/235. And thank you again to Dr. Tessa Misiaszek for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Join me Tuesday to hear all about the brainy benefits of gratitude. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.